the Rebel Capitalist Show.
I wanted to first get into this series that you did on your podcast, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Everyone's got to listen to it. I think it was a 5 or 6 part series where you kind of did a deep dive into not only Klaus, but his new book, or I think it came out maybe a year ago, year or two ago, the COVID-19, The Great Reset. And then you kind of transitioned that into his, I don't know if you want to call it a consultant with this Noah, I think his name is Noah Harari, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And what fascinated me probably most about that is you said that prior to doing the research, you were kind of on the fence. You're like, I don't know, this conspiracy theory, kind of tinfoil hat, Alex Jones stuff. And then once you started really reading the World Economic Forum's website and his book, you're like, you kind of gradually were like, wait a minute, maybe this is something that it isn't necessarily a conspiracy theory, but something that's something that's legit as far as the objectives of, we'll call it the quote unquote global elite. You want to walk us through that process?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for the kind words. So, right, just to clarify, like what you said is true, but I'm concerned some of your listeners might misunderstand. So I mean, obviously Alex Jones is way over the top and stuff. I don't know. My favorite thing recently, my wife and I will occasionally do impressions where like, I will have to eat my neighbor. You know, if it comes down to it, I'm going to eat my neighbor. This is the global system, the corner they push it into. So he's obviously putting on a show and all that stuff. So we know that, but he really has, it's a kind of thing where, a lot of stuff, he doesn't look as crazy now as he did 10 years ago. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, right.
And but I think though what you're alluding to is that two different things. So one is that like a decade plus ago, I of course was a free market economist, but I thought a lot of the people in power were just misguided. Whereas, I don't believe that anymore, for most of the people in power. But for this series in particular, I had heard of Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset and all this stuff, but I just originally, when he first came on my radar, I don't know, this is maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't think too much of it just because I thought, there's lots of academics out there with crazy, zany ideas. And I thought he was kind of like academia or maybe some kind of business leader. And I didn't really care too much. I said, I don't agree with his ideas. But like I said, there's all kinds of people from business or academia. I don't care about their ideas. But then the thing that really started making me take him seriously was when I realized he was connected with the British royal family, Prince Charles, who was, going to the WEF, the World Economic Forum, WEF, and was, and really they were united ostensibly on the issue of climate change and how we got to push through all these radical changes in how our world functions, or else, we're all, our grandkids are going to inherit a planet that's unsustained or uninhabitable. And so that's really when I realized, okay, he actually has connections to government power. And so I want to take him more seriously. And then once I just started going down that rabbit hole, he's got ties to all sorts of people. So just real quickly, and then, you can take the conversation, George, every way you want. But Klaus, he's got a PhD in engineering and economics. So he's a smart guy. I've seen interviews with him. He knows many languages fluently. He's a very cosmopolitan guy. He's very diplomatic. Like if you see him, if he's given an address, to people in UAE or something, he's very, Your Excellencies, Your Highnesses, and the ruler of Dubai, and what I mean? He's very deferential.
From him speaking down in Dubai, where he referenced the head sheik down there, and the full 5-word phrase.
Right. Yes. Yeah. All of his titles. Yeah. What is he? The ruler of Dubai and the something of
your
UAE.
Royal Highness, highest, Majesty, blah, 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 blah.
So he's a very, he's a smooth player, and he's and what he did for people, so he founded the World Economic Forum. But going back, and let me just mention this so I don't forget, I found a great piece by this guy, Johnny Vedmore. The site's called Unlimited Hangout, and it's about Klaus Schwab and how I learned to stop worrying and love the bombs. So he's doing an allusion to Dr. Strangelove. And in this article, Johnny goes through and the 3 mentors that Klaus Schwab had, and the primary one was Henry Kissinger. And so Klaus openly says that when he was, in the United States, after he'd gotten he's got his other 2 degrees, and then he took as was a seminar that Kissinger ran, and later it came out that the CIA funded this seminar. So in full disclosure, it's not crystal clear that the years that Klaus was, or the year I guess that Klaus was there, was when the CIA was funding it necessarily. But there's obviously there's a overlap there. And Klaus openly says that this is what, was Kissinger's class that got me involved in geopolitics and whatever. So he's like a consultant. And I think really the way to picture is he's a power broker. Like I saw a different article use that phrase, and I think that's what he is. And, he's very smooth and has a talent for just being real matter of fact, just talking to, like when you say talking to that clip that I had where he's talking to the Middle Eastern rulers, political officials and whatnot, and just telling them, you got to build public trust. This is what we need to do. And look at Dubai's doing a great job in terms of competitiveness. And that's the last thing I'll mention here in this opening salvo here is that he's not a Marxist. Okay. So you can call him a socialist if you want. I got no problem with that, but they understand like you got to allow decentralization somewhat, the profit motive and things. It's just, they feel, it all needs to be tempered with some other systems that help, keep, you got to have somebody in charge. Like they don't, we can't just have anarchy. So, anyway, and and you mentioned that, and some of the creepiest quotes are from a guy who is very connected with the WEF. This guy Harari, this Israeli academic. He's written several books, and basically what they're doing is they're painting a vision of the future where, because of these, what Klaus calls the fourth industrial revolution, all these advances in biotechnology and AI and things like that there's going to be this like new breed of humans that are in a sense a different species. And I'm not putting words in their mouth. Like this is how they talk.
Yeah. He says we need to take control of evolution ourselves.
Yeah.
And we need to evolve. And there's going to be some people that are just left behind. And when he's referencing the people, maybe in third world countries, he's like, well, they're just basically worthless. And, even I think you referenced those quotes exactly. And when you were saying that, and when I've heard him say that, my first kind of inclination is, okay, well, maybe this is being taken out of context here. Let's just give him the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. But even if it's taken out of context, if you listen to the words he uses to describe other people, I would never call another human being worthless. Like never in any context. And it's not just he calls them worthless, he uses other phrases that are along those lines. And then he kind of concludes by saying, well, I guess they're just going to have to play video games and take massive amounts of drugs or something. And it's just, I don't know. I think there's a lot that you can learn from someone just by listening to how they describe other people.
Right. And again, for your listeners, so there you're referring to Harari, the academic who's really tied in close with the WEF. And right, he's just, and he's sitting there lamenting. Like that's the thing is these they're like central planners on steroids. And so I think, and you're right, with one's normal inclination is to say, okay, let's not jump to conclusions here. And some of these quotes, but I think it really is just their worldview, and it sort of follows from it. Like if they truly believe, whatever, 50, 100 years from now, there's going to be such a huge chasm between the people who are plugged in. And that's another thing too that Klaus Schwab talks about, is that some will embrace this change and others will resist. And so he's almost making it sound like it's a matter of choice. And he's saying, hey, the ones who resist, the ones who don't want to, alter their DNA or augment themselves with, putting chips in their brain or whatever, and being able to have supervision because you augment your eyeballs and whatever, that, there's going to be such a huge chasm. And so they're picturing this future world. And it's sort of like the leftist trope of, if the gap between the haves and the have-nots get too big, they're going to be unruly. And that's why we need a welfare state. That's kind of where that Harari guy was coming from. He said, it's going to be no problem feeding these people. Like, so to his credit, he's not a Malthusian. He understands, with technology and AI and robots and all this stuff, it's going to be no problem feeding 10 billion plus people. That's nothing. But he said, what are we going to do with them? They're just going to, as you say, George, they're going to have meaningless lives, and they're just basically useless people. What are we going to do? And then, and again, this is the Harari guy talking. His conclusion was give them video games and drugs. So if that's the world they're envisioning, a lot of the things that are being put in place now make sense. And like, you can understand why they would want a world, as Klaus Schwab famously said, where you'll own nothing and be happy. Because you want people just living in little pods, like 10 by 10 rooms where they're just plugged into the metaverse 20 hours a day, and they don't need to own a car.
So remember the Matrix where they're in those pods and in the first one? Right.
And it's very similar to that. So I don't think they need human bodies like as batteries. That's the one part of the Matrix that I never really sat well with me. Is like, why would the machines need it? Couldn't they come up with a better way of generating energy? But I guess storing it. But in any event, it's I guess it's no fun to rule the world if it's just you and your cronies. Like, so maybe they do want to have billions of people that are kind of semi zombies. But in any event, it's in case some of your listeners are hearing this and thinking you and I are just went off the deep end. I mean, again, we're not grasping at straws. They openly talk like this in terms of what, the future they envision. And again, it's always cast as this humanitarian cloak of, oh, what are we going to do for these poor people? And that's why they're in favor of things like UBI and such, is that, because the claim is once AI and robotics continues to advance past a certain point, then there's a lot of humans who will have zero economic value. Right, that there's just nothing they can contribute because machines can do it so much better and more reliably and whatever, that in other words, like their marginal product, economically speaking, will be basically below subsistence level, and so they'll just need the system to take care of them. And then what are we going to do with these people? They might get uppity, and so let's distract them with video games and whatever. So in any event, that's kind of the vision, and you can see again, if this were just some crazy guy off writing science fiction novels, it would be one thing. But this guy, Klaus Schwab, is very plugged in. For example, he started this thing called the Young Global Leaders Initiative, where they selected people, and he openly bragged. It was funny, Jordan. I was going to do this as like a research for my podcast. What's my value add for the listeners? I was going to go through the archives of all the graduates from his program and then look and see where are they now.
Oh, but Trudeau, Macron, right. Angela Merkel, Putin, by the way.
Yeah, and he did that on his own. Klaus was being interviewed in front of us. Again, this stuff's not secret. He's openly bragging, and he said, yes, I'm very proud that our, some of the graduates of our Young Global Leaders Initiative have penetrated the cabinets of many major governments around the world. And that's his verb. He said penetrated the cabinets, not because of our training, they convinced others of the reasonableness of our views or our policy recommendations. No, he said our graduates penetrated the cabinets, which is like how intelligence agents talk.